Namaskar. We are delighted to inform Symbiosis Law School Noida, in association with Lex Witness, India's first magazine on legal and corporate affairs, THS the law firm, Sadgamaya, presents knowledge series on law and justice. The knowledge series aims to provide continuing legal education to the members of the bar and to provide an opportunity to the students of law to learn from the best and the most experienced legal luminaries and have a first-class experience of interacting with them. Today, we have among us Mr. P. Wilson, Senior Advocate, Madras High Court, and Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, to deliver his thoughts on the topic of immense importance, be it past, present, or future, which it always will remain, titled Relationship Between Legislature and Courts, Fundamental Rights and Legislative Privileges. I would like to introduce Mr. P. Wilson. Mr. P. Wilson was born in the year 1966 in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. He is a senior advocate and a member of the Rajya Sabha from Tamil Nadu. He has completed his schooling at Asan Memorial Higher Secondary School, Chennai. He obtained bachelor's degree in science from Loyola College, Chennai, and completed his Bachelor of Laws from Madras Law College. He was enrolled as an advocate with the Bar Council of Tamil Nadu in the year 1989. Mr. Wilson has been appointed to and served in several positions such as Standing Counsel for many state undertakings in Chennai Corporation, TN Slum Clearance Board, TN Civil Supplies Corporation. He had also served as a special public prosecutor for the Central Bureau of Investigation. He has served as a senior standing counsel for the Income Tax Department, Chennai Port Trust, and National Highway Authority of India. He has also defended the Telecom Regulatory Authority in several important matters. He has also served as Additional Central Government Standing Counsel, Senior Panel Counsel, Assistant Solicitor General, Special Government Pleader, Additional Advocate General of Tamil Nadu, and Additional Solicitor General, South India. He is the youngest person to be appointed as Additional Solicitor General, South India. Mr. Wilson was designated as a senior advocate by the Madras High Court in November 2009. Mr. Wilson has appeared in several important constitutional matters and several public interest litigation before the Madras High Court and the Supreme Court of India. Mr. Wilson was nominated to Rajya Sabha by the Dravid Munnitra Kazhagam and was elected unopposed. He took his oath in the Rajya Sabha on July 25, 2019. So ladies and gentlemen, today Sir is completing his first year at the services of the Parliament. Congratulations to you, sir. He is a member of the Parliamentary Standing Committee for Pensions, Public Grievance and Law and Justice. He is member of Privilege Committee of Rajya Sabha. He is also a member of the Consultative Committee for the Ministry of Defence. Now, I request Mr. Kumar Mihir, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India, who would be moderating the session, to take over the session.
Thank you, sir. We are indeed privileged to have Wilson sir, who has agreed to give us his gracious time and address us on this topic. Before I invite sir to take over and deliver the topic for today, I would like to lay down the housekeeping rules. All the participants who want to ask questions can put their questions in the Q&A box visible on your screen, and we will put those questions to sir at the end of his lecture. Those who want to ask live questions to sir can use the raise hand icon, again visible on your screen. And as and when sir allows us, we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask live questions to sir. Thank you, sir. Over to you, Wilson, sir.
Good evening to you all. Thank you very much for inviting me in this lecture series, knowledge series on law and justice. Today, I'm going to speak about on two topics. I was asked to speak on two topics. One is the relationship between legislature and courts. And the second one is the fundamental rights and legislative privileges. So they thought probably that this topic would fit for my thing. So for us, the relationship between legislature and court, I will take this, the first topic. Everyone knows that the Constitution has made it very clear about the three organs. One is legislature, number two is executive, and third one is judiciary. You know, courts have dealt in depth in many issues whenever a case comes before it as to who is supreme and whether the legislature is supreme, whether the executive is supreme, or whether the judiciary is supreme. But the Supreme Court, by its authoritative pronouncement, have made it very clear that each one is supreme in their own jurisdiction and functions. And time and again, Supreme Court, even the recent judgment in 2000, which is reported in 2020, Supreme Court has said that we should give mutual respect to each of the organs. As long as each of them act within their own jurisdiction, there will not be, be criticized. The courts have said that they should not trespass into the jurisdiction of other. The Supreme Court, in various cases, has said that each branch must support each other in the general of good governance. This separation of powers, it ensures rule of law. One, the constitutional and institutional legitimacy in the decisions of each branch. You know, the legislature enacts law, executive, they take policy decision, and so far as the judiciary is concerned, they have a power of judicial review. So this separation of powers, namely the segregation of powers and functions of the institution, if they act within their spheres as provided under the Constitution, certainly the separation of power is respected. No doubt, there are checks and balances as the Constitution itself has provided. The Supreme Court itself, in a leading decision, Sanjeev Koch's case, has said that when a statute is enacted by a parliament, and when it comes out from the parliament, the court is the authenticated voice. That is what they say. No one can speak for parliament, and parliament is not before the court. After parliament has said what it intends to say, only the court may say what the parliament meant to say, and none else. Once a statute leaves the parliament, the court is the only authentic voice which may echo, that is, interpret the parliament. The court will do it with the language of the statute and other permissible aids. What I am saying is, so far as when the parliament enacts a law and once it leaves the house, the only authenticated voice is the court. So that much of balances and separation of powers has to be respected. The Supreme Court has also said that there should be a mutual and institutional respect between all the organs. This separation of power, namely the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, are the basic feature of the Constitution. In fact, court has refrained itself from passing any directions directly to the legislature to enact any law, either directly or indirectly. And has always been very careful while interfering with the proceedings relating to the parliament, or for that matter of state legislature. Therefore, the separation of power has made it very clear that each organ has to act within itself. Now, I can straight away take to you, because this relationship between legislature and courts and the legislative privileges are somewhere are interrelated. Sometimes there were some cases which pertains to the legislative privileges and supremacy over the issue that the legislature takes. So I had been telling you about how the mutual respect has to be maintained. I would quote one judgment about the relationship, how the Supreme Court feels that fine difference should be there, and how each one has to respect each other. 2019 SEC Online SC 1144, in a case of Ashwani Kumar versus Union of India, the then law minister, he filed an application seeking for a direction to bring in law relating to the custodial torture. Three-judge bench of Supreme Court said in very many paragraphs that we can't issue such directions to the legislature. This judgment, of course, it is a short judgment, makes it very clear that the one organ cannot be taken over by the other, and that a sense of institutional committee must guide the work of legislature, executive, and judiciary. That is what they have said. So this mutual respects, which all of them have, certainly allows each of the body to function independently in their own sphere. This, apart from this judgment, which talks about the relationship as well as how each of them have to function, one more judgment is AR 1989, Supreme Court 1989, Supreme Court 1899. Here also, they have made it very clear that the state legislature, executive, and judiciary have to function within their own spheres demarcated under the Constitution. No organ can usurp the functions assigned to another. The Constitution trusts to the judgment of these organs to function and exercise their discretion by strictly following the procedures prescribed therein. And that is how they feel the functioning of the democracy upon the strength and independence of each of its organs, the legislature and executive, the two facets of people will. They have all the powers, including that of finance. So that is how they go to hold that each one of them have to mutually respect the other. Apart from this judgment, there is one more judgment, I.N. Saxena versus State of Madhya Pradesh, 1976 4 SCC, page 750. This is about whether legislature can declare a judgment as void or it can overrule a judgment. Of course, courts have held that the power of legislature is there. They can remove the basis of the judgment, but they can't declare a judgment to be void. That is what they have said. And one more judgment is 1996 7 SCC 67637. Here also they are talking about the power of the legislature while overruling a judgment. So, in my respectful view, is that each organ should operate within its sphere. As long as they operate within the sphere, the relationship would be good. In fact, I would like to take one judgment, a leading judgment. It arose from the state of Uttar Pradesh, where this is a reference by the President to the Supreme Court, AR 1965. AR 1965 AC 745. This judgment is a very leading judgment about how each one has to operate within their sphere. The facts which everyone knows about this judgment is that for a breach of privilege relating to publication of a pamphlet, is there any disturbance?
No, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
It's perfect, sir.
You're clearly audible, sir.
Yeah. This judgment pertains to a case where, for a breach of privilege, one person was reprimanded for having committed contempt relating to publication by way of a pamphlet. He was summoned to the assembly. He was not only reprimanded, but he was also committed to prison for 7 days. What happened immediately after sending him to prison? An advocate moves the High Court, Uttar Pradesh High Court. He files an application for bail, releasing on bail, as well as challenging the proceedings of the assembly. The High Court, Division Bench of the High Court, orders release of that person on bail. After the order came to be passed, the assembly passes a resolution directing to take custody of 2 High Court judges as well as advocate and bring them to assembly. What happened is, after the assembly passes this resolution, the 2 judges of the High Court, they file a writ petition before the High Court, and a full bench heard the matter, and they stayed the orders of the assembly. Consequence to this deadlock, and seeing that the things are not moving in a right direction, the President made a reference to the Honorable Supreme Court as to find out the powers and privileges of the legislature. Various questions were referred to the Honorable Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in a leading judgment, 7-judge bench in the AR 1965 Supreme Court 745, has dealt in threadbare Article 194, which is the power, source of power. And which deals with the powers and privileges of the legislature, of the House, and gave a judgment that each organ has to function within the sphere. Now, if you see this Article 194, it has 4 clauses. So that is why when I started earlier, I said this relationship between the legislature and courts, somewhat, we have to touch on the topic of the legislative privileges and the fundamental rights. This Article 194, if you see, it has got 4 clauses. The first clause, Article 194, reads that subject to the provisions of this Constitution and to the rules and standing orders regulating the procedure of legislature, there shall be freedom of speech in the legislature of every state. So therefore, this article gives enormous power for the legislature or the members in the legislature, the freedom of speech. It is not curtailed or restricted under Article 19(1)(a). So this 194 clearly gives enormous power, the freedom of speech in the legislature, and subject to the rules or standing orders of the legislature. Now, you have to see this Article 194(2) also. 194(2) reads, no member of legislature of a state shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or any vote given by him in the legislature or any committee thereof, and no person shall be so liable in respect of the publication by or under authority of a house of such a legislature of any report, paper, votes or proceedings. So here again, you can see that the privilege is that they are not liable for any action with regard to the statement they have made or publication that has been made with the authority of the House. And this complete protection is given under Article 194(2). So this includes even the defamation, libel, all, and even the civil proceedings. I'm going to take you to the leading judgment of Supreme Court, what they have said on this. 3. In other respects, the powers, privileges, and immunities of a house of legislature of a state and of the members and committees of a house of such legislature shall be such as may from time to time be defined by the legislature by law, and until so defined shall be those of that house and of its members and committees immediately before coming into force of Section 26 of the Constitution, 44th Amendment Act 1978. Therefore, this immunities which is given under Article 194 is subject to the powers, subject to the laws that has been framed, and if the laws are not available, but that shall be those that were prevailing immediately before the coming into the force of Section 26. That is what the Article 194(3) reads. Now, one more clause, I'll read this and I will take you to this judgment. Article 194(4). The provisions of clause 1, 2, and 3 shall apply in relations to persons who, by virtue of this Constitution, have the right to speak in and otherwise to take part in proceedings of a House of Legislature of a state or any committee thereof, as they apply in relation to the members of that legislature. Therefore, the protection and privileges that is available is also available if you take part in any of the proceedings by any legislator or even in a committee. Committee, you know, the standing committees are there. They are nothing but extended parliament. My good friend was saying that I'm a member of this Parliamentary Standing Committee for Pensions, Law and Justice. So these committees also will have this privileges and protection. Now, why I read this Article 194 is precisely the issue in this AR 1965 Supreme Court 745 was about the power of the legislature and the privileges, whether they can, under the guise of exercise of this power under Article 194, they can summon a judge who has done his duty, namely who has heard the matter and who has passed orders after hearing the parties. Likewise, the advocate who has also summoned, who has who has done his duty as per the Advocates Act, whether the legislature had a power under Article 194 even to summon an advocate just because he had filed a case before the High Court and got a stay order. So all these issues were dealt threadbare. Now, if you see, so far as Article 212 is concerned, there is a limitation to 211, restriction on discussion in the legislature. No discussion shall take place in the legislature of a state with respect to the conduct of any judge of the Supreme Court or of a High Court in discharge of his duties. So this absolute immunity is also simultaneously given to the judges who discharge their duties or functions while they deliver their judgments. So that Article 211 was also considered. Now, what the Supreme Court has said in this judgment is, I took you to Article 194(1), the rights which is available for a legislator, and for that matter, for the legislature, whether any speech made by him that will be restricted under Article 19(1)(a). That was a question which was asked and that was answered. The Supreme Court have clearly answered that 19(1)(a) will not apply when the power of a legislature or that a matter legislator is exercised under Article 194. I think I need not explain that. Suppose I am a parliamentarian. I am taking part in a debate, and I am speaking something. I am criticizing someone. Therefore, the fundamental rights, part 3, under Article 19(1), which regulates, which has got a restriction under 19(1)(a), you can see this: all citizens have the right to freedom of speech and expression. But this freedom of expression is subject to 19(2), which means it can't be defamatory. So the question that was posed before the Supreme Court is whether a legislator can speak in violation of this 19(1)(a) and beyond 19(2). The Supreme Court said, yes, 19(1)(a) doesn't apply in this case, which means that the privilege of Parliament is supreme, because there should be a healthy debate. There should be a healthy debate. After all, they are espousing or voicing the cause of the people. And that is how they have to, they are discharging their duty. And therefore, this Article 19(1)(a) doesn't comes into play. That is what the Supreme Court has said in this judgment. And this privileges which is given under 19(1), namely that fundamental rights does not get attracted, whether it will apply to 194(3). 194(3), you saw, that is a power of the House where they can, reprimand a person. They can exercise that power to punish a person. So that power, when they exercise their power, whether they have to act within the fundamental rights. When this question was raised before the Parliament, in the court, the Supreme Court has said, yes, insofar as exercise of power under Article 194(3), they are certainly bound by this article, bound by this part 3 of the fundamental rights, and certainly they have to, respect whatever the powers that has been given. That is what they have said in this, so far as Article 194(3) is concerned. This judgment also takes note of the coordination and the independency of each other, that they have to act within the scheme of the Constitution. Now, in this judgment, what they have said is, when they take this Article 194(3), they also rely upon Article 208. If you see this Article 208, this is about the rules of procedure framed by the legislature. This rule clearly qualifies by saying that a House for legislature of a state may make rules for regulating, subject to the provisions of this Constitution, its procedure and the conduct of its business. Therefore, the Supreme Court, while interpreting that if you, by the exercise of your privileges, you are going to reprimand a person or convict a person, then certainly you are proceeding as per the rules framed under Article 208. And therefore, when you exercise your power, certainly you have to take into consideration the power that is provided to a person under Article 21. So this fundamental rights of Article 21 has to be taken into consideration, even though the House in exercise of its power for contempt, wants to convict a person. And that is how they have said, insofar as the exercise of such power is concerned, Article 21 certainly comes into play, and the difference between the Article 194.1 and 194.3, the dichotomy the Supreme Court laid in the interpretation of application of fundamental rights, one where they said when you are a legislator, when you are a legislature, you want to debate, certainly this fundamental rights under 19.1 will not come into play. But when you exercise your power of a contempt and you are going to punish a person, and certainly the fundamental rights comes into play, and the person who comes before the legislature, his fundamental rights have to be respected. And that is how they have said that the actions are contrary to Article 21, and that is how they interfere with the actions of the legislature. Here, they also say that when you are exercising your powers and privileges, when the legislature is exercising its power and privileges under Article 194, as I've read to you earlier, this Article 211, the protection or immunity that is given to a judge of a high court has to be certainly taken into consideration. And once it is taken into consideration, certainly the legislature, under the guise of its powers and privilege under Article 194, cannot go to the extent of summoning a judge who has discharged his duty, namely who had heard the case and passed interim order. And likewise, the Supreme Court also interpreted that so far as a lawyer is concerned, he is only assisting the citizens to protect the fundamental rights to move the High Court, and therefore the power which is exercised by him pursuant to the Advocates Act, certainly this article, it will not come within the purview of Article 194.3. That is what the Supreme Court has said. And the power to punish, this is very important. One paragraph the Supreme Court has said at paragraph number 142, they say that the power to punish should be exercised cautiously, wisely, and within circumspection. Frequent or indiscriminate use of this power in anger or irritation would help to sustain the dignity or status of the court, but sometimes it affects adversely. Even the wise judges never forget that the best way to sustain the dignity and status of their office is to deserve respect from the public at large by the quality of judgments, the fearlessness, fairness, and objectivity of their approach, and by their restraint. What they have said for judges, this is the last few lines I wanted to read that. They ultimately end up saying what is true of the judicature is equally true of the legislature. So whatever we have said, that so far as the contempt powers, which has to be exercised sparingly and with this circumspection and not indiscriminately, that has to be respected, and it has to be equally applied to the legislation. So this judgment is a leading judgment which was followed in very many judgments, and this parliamentary privilege, I wanted to tell what all the parliament what are privileges the parliament enjoys? As I said, there is a freedom of speech in the parliament. When you take fundamental rights, certainly the fundamental rights will not come into play. The other privileges is that immunity to a member from any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or any vote given by him in parliament or any committee thereof. You know, in JMM bribery case, the immunity was given. A cash for vote scams case, immunity was given. So that immunity is there. Then immunity to a person from proceedings in any court in respect of the publication by or under the authority of either House of Parliament of any report, paper, votes or proceedings. Now there is one act called as the Parliamentary Proceedings Protection of Publication Act 1977. Whatever legislator speaks in the parliament or for that matter in a legislature, and if it is printed and published, this act, so far as act pertaining to the parliament, it protects such publications. Section 3 says, save as otherwise provided in subsection 2, no person shall be liable to any proceedings, civil or criminal, in any court in respect of the publication in a newspaper of a substantially true report of any proceedings of either House of Parliament, unless the publication is proved to have been made with a malice. So this is what the protection is given, and the privilege is also there. Then prohibition on the courts to inquire into proceedings of Parliament. You know, Article 122, there is a prohibition for the courts to enter into the proceedings of the Parliament. And ultimately, it is the presiding officer of the House to take care as to how the House should be conducted. Every proceedings cannot, under the guise of violation of fundamental rights, be brought to the court. But one exception is that if there is any illegality or it is in violation of constitutional provisions, then that proceedings can be brought or challenged before the court. So therefore, for that matter, all proceedings cannot be brought before the court, and court, certainly if it is a irregularity, the court will not entertain, and that is one of the important privilege that has been given. Then one more privilege is freedom from arrest of members in civil cases during continuance of the session of the House, and 40 days before its commencement and 40 days after its conclusion. There is one provision, section 135A in the Code of Civil Procedure. This is an exemption of members of legislative bodies from arrest and detention under the civil process. So this privilege is there, which I read to you. They have given 40 days before and after. This is before the commencement and after commencement, after conclusion of the parliament or the legislature. And next one is the right of the House to receive immediate information of the arrest, detention, conviction, imprisonment, and release of a member under rules 222A and 222B. Then immunity from arrest and service of legal process within the precinct of the House without obtaining the permission of the chairman speaker. Here, that is why I am saying, despite all the fundamental rights are there, these are all the privileges that is available. Then protection of publication of the proceedings of a secret sitting of the House. Then members or officers of the House cannot give evidence or produce in courts of law documents relating to the proceedings of the House without the permission of the House. Then members or officers of the House cannot be compelled to attend as a witness before the other House or a committee thereof, or before a House of State Legislature or a committee thereof without the permission of the House. Then the evidence tendered before a parliamentary committee and its report and proceedings cannot be disclosed or published by anyone until these have been laid on the table of the House. So these are all the privileges and protection and immunity that has been given. Now, I was telling about this cash for query scam. There's one judgment, this also pertaining to the privileges of Parliament, 2007, 3 SEC, page 184. Rajaram Paul versus Lok Sabha, Honorable Speaker Lok Sabha. Here, the power of the Parliament to expel a member when they were found that they were acting against the parliamentary procedures. So they have interpreted that though the power of expel is not seen in these articles, namely Article 101 and 102, the power are so wide enough and they are not exhaustive that the Parliament can even expel their own member. This judgment, in fact, was followed in another case, but here the Supreme Court, after a period of 3 years, it had an occasion to consider the expulsion of a member in Amarinder Singh, 2010, 6 SEC, page 113. In this judgment, the Supreme Court took a different view that yes, even though in Rajaram Pal's case, we had held that the House has got absolute power to expel its member, and this expulsion of the member is subject to judicial review. However, it all depends upon the facts of the case, and that merely because a person has done some mistake or has done some illegality doesn't mean that he can be simply expelled from the House. This judgment, Amarinder Singh, is a slight, deviation from the earlier pronouncement of judgment. Both are constitutional bench judgment. The power to expel a member on the ground of alleged misconduct, they have lightly differentiated in this subsequent judgment. So then everyone knows about this judgment about the cash for vote. This is P.V. Narasimha Rao's case, 1998, 4 SEC, page 626, where, for the purpose of voting, bribes were paid. And as I said earlier, the immunity theory was applied, and they have said that these legislators fall within the immunity under Article 105(2). Of course, 3 judges have held that immunity is there, but 2 of them dissented. So then I would also quote one more judgment about the power of the legislature and power of the court to review the decisions of a legislature. This is K.A. Madhiyalagan versus P. Srinivasan. This is also a leading case that, of course, arises from the Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly. AR 1973, Madras, page 371. AR 1973, Madras, page 3 71. This is K. Madhiyalagan versus P. Srinivasan. And one more judgment. This is 1994 2 Law Weekly, page 424. This is, of course, a full bench decision of Madras High Court, where they went to the extent of imposing cost on the state legislature. This is a very leading judgment. They imposed a cost of 1,000 rupees because a person was sent to jail, publisher of a magazine called Ananda Vigadan. He has published 2 cartoons, a cartoon MLA as a pickpocketer and a minister in a covered face, a mask, as a one who is doing dacoity. So that the Tamil Nadu Assembly punished the publisher, and of course he's also an editor. And this matter went up to the to the High Court, and of course it took some time for the High Court to decide the matter. Even then, the High Court held that there is a gross violation of fundamental rights while dealing with this particular person and while punishing him. And therefore, this judgment also throws much light about how the fundamental rights is supreme. And certainly, the courts have power over interpretation. Whenever there is violation of constitutional rights, they say that final authority to state the meaning of constitution and settle the constitutional controversies exclusively belongs to the Supreme Court and High Court as sentinels of both the constitution and the democracy, as well as the fundamental rights of citizens. And construction of Article 194(3), not the exclusive domain or of the sole arbitral or absolute discretion of the House of the Legislature. All powerful posture or claim of sky-high powers or suzerain claims of sovereignty or overlordism have to be brushed aside as nothing but fossils of tyrannical and anarchical past. No law or procedure laid down by law or action taken thereunder can be arbitrary or irrational or oppressive. They say the natural justice principles requirement is implicit in Article 21. And that's how they have dealt with this matter. And there are other judgments. There are many other judgments which this 2020, Ashwani Kumar, which I was talking about the relationship, is reported in 2019 SCC Online SC 1144. 2019 SCC Online SC 1144. I would only request Mr. Rajkamal to play that 5-minute video so that
Yes.
how the Parliament sees when a court passes an order affecting the powers and privileges of the presiding officer. Please see this. I will tell you how this issue has arisen. You know, there is no law. Of course, we have a 10th schedule, and 10th schedule does not fix us any time limit for the presiding officer to decide a disqualification issues. A case came up before the Honorable Supreme Court in Kesham Meghchandra Singh, and the Honorable Supreme Court, 3-judge bench of Honorable Supreme Court gave a direction that whenever a disqualification petition comes before the presiding officer, they have to hear it in a time frame manner, and they have to decide it. That was a direction of Honorable Supreme Court insofar as the 10th schedule is concerned. And they have even called upon the Parliament to consider framing any time limit. please see this video clipping and you will understand as to how the Parliament has...
What is Mr. Wilson? P. Wilson?
Thank you, Honorable Chairman, sir. Sir, today I bring to your kind attention of this August House to the fact that the legislative intent of the anti-defection law inserted by the Constitution 52nd Amendment 1985 stands defeated by the inordinate delay in taking up and disposing complaints by the authorities referred in Clause 6.1, that is, the Speaker of the House or the Chairman as the case may be. We have noticed in past few decades that various speakers from state legislatures who act as a tribunal under the 10th schedule sit over the issue of disqualification indefinitely. Sir, the object of the Constitution 52nd Amendment Act 1985 is to curb the evil of political defection motivated by lure of office or other similar consideration which endanger the foundation of our democracy. A political party goes before the electorate with a particular program and sets up its candidates on certain promises. Such a person who gets elected after election cannot change his affiliation for extraneous reasons. Sir, there are many instances wherein the Speaker of certain state assemblies sit over the issue relating to disqualification for years together, driving the aggrieved person to approach the courts. The Honorable Supreme Court recently in the Manipur Assembly case has stepped in and directed the Speaker to decide the disqualification petition within 4 weeks. The court also called upon the Parliament to consider amending the Constitution to substitute the Speaker of the Houses with an independent tribunal to decide disputes concerning disqualification arising under the 10th schedule. Sir, even in the elections to the municipal body post across India, it has been widely reported that persons who have been elected under the symbol of one party switches over to other parties for indirect election of post of chairman, etc. And the reason is that 10th schedule of the Constitution is not extended to the local bodies created under Part 9A and 9 of the Constitution of India. Sir, therefore, this August House should act to save the purity of democratic process by ensuring that the mandate given by the people to a particular candidate, a party, is not tainted by that candidate's switching allegiance. This can be done only by fixing a mandatory time frame to decide defection cases by the competent authority under the 10th schedule. I also request this August House to extend the application of 10th schedule to the post of Part 9 and 9A, that is, municipal and local bodies, by suitably amending the Constitution. Thank you, Chairman, sir.
Thank you. So unfortunately, people are saying now, it's not defection, it's only affection, and they are doing it with perfection. We must put an end to this. It's a very important issue across the country, cutting across party lines. We must really come forward to suggest some alternative to end this nuisance or nonsense or unethical acts of this defection. A very important issue. Even the court has commented recently, but everybody is taking time. Presiding officers are taking time. Courts are also taking time. And then we are helpless. Law Ministry is here. I hope that he will apply his mind. Need not reply now, but apply. Freedom. I'm not asking the Minister to reply, but apply your mind and see to it that this issue is taken up at the appropriate level in consultation with all the concerned. Honorable members, Kakashan, I think, is not there. She raised an issue.
To the Supreme Court, that sweeping, with the greatest respect to the Supreme Court, those sweeping comments against the presiding officers were surely avoidable. We need to have institutional respect for all the institutions of the country.
Right.
And the presiding officers of the legislatures are equally important functionary in the constitutional process. That I must place on record.
That's why I also said, yes.
I agree with the Honorable Minister, Law Minister on this. This is a serious matter. It's a transgression. The Constitution is clear in its scheme of things and the division.
So, before going to question hour, I have a suggestion to make. Even the Secretariat also must take note of it. And people give notices. It is written in front of that. Already raised one issue in this week. And some of the notices which were admitted, 1 or 2 today, no such information was brought to my notice. So whether we must have a practice of whoever has utilized one opportunity, he will get opportunity only next week. First come first in this week, whoever has come and which is admitted, that will be taken up. And second, if the time permits, then.
So,
Thank
why I asked you to play this 5 minutes video footage is, in Manipur assembly case, the Supreme Court called upon the Parliament, to bring in a legislation to give the powers that is entrusted to a speaker to a quasi-judicial authority, because after all, the speaker acts as a tribunal. The Supreme Court also gave direction to the presiding officer. Presiding officer is nothing but the speaker. When they come to Parliament, they are the chairman in Rajya Sabha and speaker in Lok Sabha. And so far as the assembly is concerned, they are speaker. So they have given a direction to the speaker to decide within 4 weeks the issue relating to disqualification. When I raised this before the Parliament and I said, why don't you bring in a law and have some time limit? In fact, the Honorable Chairman in one of his proceedings has said, let's have some outer time limit so that let the presiding officer also understand the job they are entrusted with. And after all, it's a defection which ultimately takes away the intention of the electorate. When electorate elect you for a particular party, you are switching on lines. And the Rajya Sabha, when I made this speech, the law minister rose up and he raised up and he said that there is a transgression into the powers of the Parliament. So why I'm saying is, this is how the Parliament feels that one has to act within the sphere of the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Raj has few questions he's received from some people. So I'll ask Raj to start the question and then we'll go to the live one.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mihir. So one of our participants, Mr. Dr. Madhukar Sharma, he has a query. I'll quote, sir. In parliamentary form of government, legislative power is what is discretion of the executive. The distinction between the legislature and executive has blurred to great extent, sir. What are your views on this, sir?
Sir, normally the executive assist in bringing in laws. The executive places all the materials before the Prime Minister and his cabinet minister. It places it before the cabinet. The cabinet considers it, and then once the cabinet approves it, then it is introduced into the House. Now, there's a loud thinking that why don't we bring in the participation of the stakeholders before a law is made. That is what I'm in the Committee of Ministry of Law and Justice. What I have been telling all of them is, when you bring in some law, it should not be brought immediately. It affects a whole lot of stakeholders or persons who's having more stakes in this law. Example, 138 amendment under the Negotiable Instrument Act. All of a sudden, 138 was brought, and the courts did not have much infrastructure. And even the amendments in the Motor Vehicles Act. And so these are all areas where even the POXCO, you would have seen, they are not capable of handling the cases. So our suggestion is, why don't you rope in all the participants, get their views, and then we can make it as a law and place it before the Parliament. Here, what you say is the executive doesn't play a major role except for assisting. No, there are standing committees. The standing committees deliberate on these issues and ultimately places it before the cabinet, and that's how it comes before the Parliament. Parliamentary Standing Committee, they give us a report to the Parliament, and sometimes the executive, they make all this and place it before the cabinet, and that's how the cabinet recommends for placing it as a bill before the parliament. And once it comes before the parliament, sometimes it is even being sent to the standing committees, back to the standing committees or select committee. They select some members, and even they debate on the certain clauses. So therefore, you can't say that ultimately the executives are behind these laws. Maybe their role is very less, not the entire role.
Thank you, sir. Sir, and another participant, Mr. Satya Prakash, I'll quote his question. Sir, why don't Parliament use its power under Article 105, Clause 3 to enact a law to define parliamentary privileges? Also, the Supreme Court's verdict in P.V. Narasimha Rao's case in 98 and Raja Rampal's case in 2007 clearly appears to be contradictory. How can this contradiction be resolved, sir?
Sir, I would only quote, the views of a former Chief Justice who was a chairman. He said, better not to codify any law so far as the privileges are concerned, because the damage that is going to cause if you quote, the parliamentary privileges will be more, and the intervention of the court will be more. That is what he has suggested. So that is how till today the parliament has not framed any law on this privileges. So probably if you frame any privileges, then whatever the area where the court is allowing the parliament to have its own privileges gets restricted. That is what the former Chief Justice said. He was a chairman of Rajya Sabha, Justice Hidayatullah, the then Chief Justice. What he says is, I will read this. If there is a mutual trust and respect between parliament and courts, there is hardly any need to codify the law on the subject of privileges. With the codification of law, more advantage will flow to person bent on vilifying parliament, its members and committees, and the courts will be called upon more and more to intervene. At the moment, given a proper understanding on both sides, Parliament's right to punish for breach of its privilege and contempt would rather receive the support of the court than otherwise. A written law will make it difficult for the Parliament as well as courts to maintain that dignity which rightly belongs to Parliament and which courts will always uphold as zealously as they uphold their own. So a delicate balance has to be maintained by the mutual respect and trust of the institution for one another is the ultimate prescription and guarantee for a successful working of the constitutional institution. That is how he has suggested. He is a former Chief Justice of India.
Thank you, sir. So before going to the other questions, Mihir, if you could ask the participants to ask live questions.
Yes. Avinash Vishen, can you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the great lecture, sir. Sir, in the starting, you stated that as long as all the functionaries function in their own respective spheres, there is no problem with regards to supremacy. I would like to draw your attention to the test of manifest arbitrariness that the Supreme Court has in legal system, wherein they've said that if a legislature is manifestly arbitrary, it essentially means that there was no need to legislate on the subject matter, or the subject matter that was legislated on, there was no clear identification. Do you think such a doctrine is necessary in the Indian legal system when you've already got doctrines such as constitutional morality and arbitrariness in itself? Do you think a manifest arbitrariness would be the impediment of the Supreme Court into the legislative sphere?
No, nothing. See, you are testing a statute. on various grounds. This statute, whether it is within, it is ultra vires of constitution or ultra vires of any fundamental rights, or you are exceeding your power, jurisdiction. And the Supreme Court very recently, they have said that the validity of a statute can also be challenged on the ground of manifest arbitrariness. This is only a challenge to a statute. How do you say that is intrusion into a privilege? We are now talking about the privilege under Article 194. So that I don't think so that has any effect on the privilege.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Abhishek Kaushik, can you unmute yourself and ask a question, please?
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for such an erudite talk. Not only it's a talk, you have presented the relevant material, read out the parts of judgment, showed the video in which you are live in the parliament asking the relevant questions. Sir, my question comes out from the fact that when the parliament or the legislative body, be it parliament or be it the local body, the entire thing works on democracy. Democracy starts from panchayat system. Now, when the legislature exercises its power, delimitation becomes one of the important facets of democracy. We have seen in past that the legislature wants to conduct election without having the delimitation exercises being undertaken. For example, in Tamil Nadu, we have seen section 28A coming into Tamil Nadu Panchayat Act, then 28AA came, AAA came, and thereafter only recently I think the legislation has done away with it. But all of them ensured that from 2006 till 2020, all the elections were conducted as per 1991 census, and delimitation was not done. Idea of asking this question is, should not this issue also be raised that when a legislature is entrusted with such huge responsibilities, they should be able to discharge that, and once they are not, the concerned people should be, there should be some mechanism for the purpose of fastening liabilities even on such legislature. And this is across the party border. This is not one party, and talking from 2011, I think at least till 2020. So this is my question for deliberation to you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, in fact, this matter I had appeared for the party, for the Supreme Court. What happened is, from 2016 till 2020, the government didn't want to have a panchayat election held. And therefore, they were getting advices from the lawyers from Supreme Court and bringing some ordinances, and they were purchasing time. And so far as delimitation is concerned, the Constitution itself clearly says that delimitation has to be, followed. Even though they wanted to buy time, they took it to their advantage. They brought in a law saying that the delimitation has to take place. When they brought in a law and they didn't, complete that delimitation issue, and when they found that the climate is in their favor, because the climate is in their favor in the sense that, the certain writ petitions, in fact, I myself had filed a writ petition saying that you can't, have without a panchayat election being conducted, because the Constitution itself says that once in 5 years the body has to come into play, and therefore they have not conducted the panchayat elections. And when a judgment was rendered by the division bench, first bench of our High Court, comprising of Honorable Mrs. Justice Indira Banerjee, as she then was, and Honorable Mr. Justice M. Sundar, giving a positive direction to the State Election Commission to conduct the election before November 2018. What they did is they never obeyed the order of the court. Instead, they didn't even file an appeal. They brought in some ordinance. You said 28A, 28AA, 28AAA, 2844, 4As, all this, they adopted all these statutes. Anyway, that one fine day where the Supreme Court said, no, nothing doing. There was a litigation pending before the Supreme Court simultaneously to conduct the local body elections. and Supreme Court gave a direction to conduct the election. And when they attempted to conduct election without following the delimitation, then in fact I had appeared along with Abhishek Manu Singhvi before the Honorable Supreme Court, Honorable Chief Justice bench. They gave a direction. In fact, when the delimitation was not conducted for 9 districts, they stopped election in 9 districts. Today, for 9 districts, the elections are not being conducted because the delimitation has not been held. So therefore, this factor of delimitation, certainly they have to respect. That's a constitutional requirement. And the Supreme Court has granted an order in our favor when they didn't conduct the delimitation, and they went when they proceeded to conduct election, an order of an absolute stay has been granted, and that's how the local body elections were conducted. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Madhukar Sharma, can you unmute yourself and ask a question, please?
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question is not a question of law, rather it's a question of morality. If I lay a brief background that whenever there is a conflict between legislature and executive on the one end and the judiciary on the other side, it is legislature and the executive that has surrendered its supremacy before the judiciary. If we take up the case of SP Gupta, presidential reference, or the latest one, the NJAC, National Judicial Appointment Commission, sir. Sir, isn't it high time that the Supreme Court must also realize its constitutional morality when the Supreme Court is deciding the extent of its power, scope and extent of its power? Sir, what is your view in respect of this point, sir? That it is high time that the Supreme Court must also realize the constitutional morality when the Supreme Court decides the extent, scope and extent of its constitutional powers.
So that is what I took you through various judgments, that judges has to act within that sphere. That is what consistently the Supreme Court has been saying, even though you are talking about judicial activism. And this judicial activism, by way of entertaining public interest litigation, sometimes, the Supreme Court itself is not accepting that. So therefore, there are change of views. Law is not static. The law changes. And when it goes to a larger bench, they understand the mutual respect has to be given for each of the organs. So the judge cannot be an administrator. A judge cannot make a law. These are all well-settled decisions. Therefore, I don't think so the Supreme Court will go against these well-settled decisions. Here and there, you may see 1 or 2 judgments, but that is a per curiam. That's what the Supreme Court subsequently, it has got a power to review, to not to accept their judgments, saying that it's per curiam without adherence to the judgments, earlier judgments, or to the law, or to the Constitution.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one question we have got in the Q&A box, which is relevant in the news that is we are seeing, especially in Rajasthan these days. Mr. Abhishek Kaushik wants to know the scope of whip, and he asks a question whether a lawmaker expelled by a political party can be tried for anti-defection law for defying a party whip even after their expulsion, sir. So would you like to throw a little light on the issue of whips, their scope, and this question, sir?
See, this is fully covered by the 10th schedule. The members have to act in accordance with the directions of the whip. So whatever the whip gives a direction, and they have to necessarily, act. Now, therefore, if a whip gives certain directions, certainly he has to act in accordance with the directions given by the party whip. And if he is going to act in defiance to the directions of the whip, and if it is not condoned, see, it is after all, the Constitution takes care of the internal problems. Today, he may work against me. But if I condone that act, like how it happened in Tamil Nadu, 10 legislators, they defied the order of whip. They voted against the present Chief Minister, Mr. Honorable Sri Edappadi Palanichami. But, after that, after the whip is issued, after they defied, after they voted, then all of them have joined together. So, therefore, this is all to facilitate that party which has got a majority and in fact, a party which has got, their party which wants their own members to be under their control, this power of anti-defection law is given. So therefore, once the whip issues a direction and if the members doesn't obey that, so this is with regard to the house. It has got nothing to do with expulsion from his party. So still, with regard to the house, he has defied the whip's order and he has acted contrary to the whip's order, which has not been condoned. And so therefore, the whip goes and files a petition before the presiding officer. So I think the 10th schedule clearly attracts in this case.
Right. Dr. Madhukar Sharma, have you got a follow-up question?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Sir, another issue that has arisen is, especially because you referred to 10th schedule and whips, one question has come to us saying that is it not that whip can only be issued when legislative body is in session and not when it is not in session?
You can't say like that. See, the whip, what circumstances he is going to issue that? It is in towing line with the party's direction. So it is not as if only when the session commences, only when the person comes and sits inside the house and issues a whip. It's a general order of why he is called as a whip. He keeps everyone under control and they have to follow the directions of the whip. So not necessarily only when a session is there, then he can issue. Even 10 days before a session, he can issue a direction, because if he sees some of his members are going to defy his orders, or they are going to cross over, and suddenly that power he can utilize and he can say that, look, you have to follow this.
Sir, one last question that has come to us is with respect to the unruly behavior of our members of our legislatures. We have seen the pepper spray incident in Parliament. We have seen legislative members fighting, being physical with each other. We have seen people throwing chairs at each other. So one question has come from someone from Madras High Court. He wants to know what is the immunity given to a member of legislature when, say, for example, he opens fire. He fires inside the house for, say, self-defense. So in such case, what is the privileges, or what are the protections, or what is to be done?
That is what I say. If you see Article 208, the power is codified. Rules of procedure is always codified. You can't carry firearms inside a house. I don't know how this question, the person maker of this question has got this vague thoughts. So therefore, first of all, you can't enter with all this firearms and other things.
Yes.
Are checked thoroughly. And even that also, so far as this rules, to that extent only you are protected. You can't go beyond that. So therefore, law will take its own course, and the speakers are there, and the presiding officer conduct their house, like how the judges conduct the court. Even a behavior of an advocate, if the court feels that is not up to the mark, suddenly actions are initiated. Like that, the power is always there with the speaker. So not as if everything and anything can be done inside the house.
Thank you, sir. So we have last few live questions. Mr. Abhishek Kaushik, can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Thank you, sir. This is in continuation to the follow-up of the whip question that was asked. So in this respect, I was just wondering, and this is a food for thought also, that consider a case where there is an ideological difference between a legislature with his party. and he feels that his party is not doing the mandate, not committed to the mandate which the public had given, and therefore he has now been expelled from such party. Now, are we then suggesting that even after being expelled, he is to follow the whip nevertheless, and or else quit the house, forcing the exchequer to incur additional expenditure for again conducting the election? Because till the time he is a member of the house, even though he's an expelled member, he is member of the house, and he, as a democratic participant of the house, he is entitled to vote the way in which he wants to vote. But if we say, like what 10th schedule mandates, that if he has to vote for what political party's whip has been issued, then are we not saying that we are actually destroying the very democracy for which the constitution stands? This is something which I was thinking. I'm leaving it to you for further deliberation. Thank you.
There's no question of destroying constitution or something. Here, a party goes before the people. It projects its policies. It projects what it has done to the people. Then it gets its candidates elected. People are voting for the party. So that is the direct election. You see, that's a difference between indirect election and direct election. And if that person comes and he crossovers and he doesn't, get along with the whip's direction, certainly the whip can take necessary steps. As if this person, for public policy wants to do something, he can voice everything within the party itself. You have some you have some any grievance, you can take up to your party. You can vindicate your grievance there. So therefore, you can't, after getting elected yourself, you can't simply, I will resign from the party and then I'll go and treat myself as an independent member. No, for the purpose of, the legislature or a parliamentary allocation of seats and other procedures, you are treated to be a person elected from this party. So therefore, merely because you say that I have been expelled or I resign, doesn't mean that you can switch over to the party. What all this exactly what has happened in Tamil Nadu. So of course the anti disqualification petitions have been filed and pending. There were cases, 18 MLAs were disqualified already. And there are cases where, where I said that a person who has voted against the whip, then they filed a petition, but they condoned. So that is what they are claiming. So that's all a matter sub judice before the courts. So I don't think so. Merely because you resign or because you are expelled, it doesn't mean that the whip cannot take any action under the 10th schedule.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. That is the end of the live. I think we have one more live question. Mr. Vikram Singh. Mr. Vikram Singh, can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Good evening, sir. Sir, this question, you may find it off the direction or you may find it tangential of the discussion. But sir, my query is this: many times when the government is coming to the power, and I'm asking this question because you have seen both the sides. You have the experience of the legislator as well as an advocate, and moreover, you are having such a kind of vast experience and knowledge over the subject. Many times the government the political parties, they are making the promises on the basis of their manifestos. They are getting elected, and once they come to the power, in the name of exercise of their legitimate power, they are misusing it. Actually, it is colorable exercise of power. I'm not going to name any government or like this, but there was a recent case in a particular state wherein the chief minister, through a particular piece of regulation and law, he actually got the entire cases against him dismissed. So when this kind of activity is there any provision that on the basis of the doctrine of basic structure, can we challenge the legitimacy of this kind of government? Is there any provision or
you can
directive in the
challenge
law?
action. You can challenge his action. That is why I said, even though there are three organs, judiciary certainly can review the actions of a person who has come into power. If he is going to, abuse his power, or he is going to bring it through a legislature and, does in these types of activities, certainly you can challenge it by way of, writ petition, and judicial review is certainly permissible. I had appeared in many cases, where the person who has come to power has abused his position, and in fact, in Gutka case, you would have heard about the famous Gutka case. I was a person who got a CBI probe into it, and I appeared even in Supreme Court when it was challenged, and of course got it dismissed. There were the involvement of the allegation is that some ministers were involved. And in fact, if you see why Jayalalitha was, the then former chief minister, was convicted, if there is any irregularities, illegalities, corruption, certainly even when she was in power, criminal case was filed, and she was convicted. She was in jail, of course, when she filed an appeal, and when it went to Supreme Court, she was no more. But the Supreme Court has, confirmed the judgment of single judge. So therefore, you can't say that merely because a person has abused his power, he'll go scot-free. Certainly, the laws are there, and the courts are there. And the courts, Supreme Court certainly, entertains cases and proceeds in accordance with law.
Mihir, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, sir. There are no more questions we have right now. So I'll invite Professor Dr. C.J. Ravandle to give the concluding remarks.
Mr. Balram Pandey.
Oh, there's one more, sir. Mr. Balram Pandey, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? Mr. Balram Pandey, ask your question, please.
I think he has some issue. Mr. Mir, yep.
Yes, sir. So I will now invite sir to give the concluding remark.
So thank you very much for the session. And again, I repeat that we congratulate you on completion of your first year, being the member of the Parliament, the Rajya Sabha. I would like to make two submissions, because basics cannot be forgotten, and unless we remember the basics, what follows is the confusion, and that's what we find when it comes to the discussion between the powers amongst the three said to be arms of the state: Parliament, Executive, and the Judiciary. We have to understand the situation in India as an Indian. We don't have to cite how it is handled in United States of America or in the United Kingdom, because the situation is handled as per the law applicable and in that particular state. Like, let us go to the concept, or said to be the principle, of separation of power. There are two words which make the difference between the system in United States of America vis-a-vis the system respect to separation of powers in India. Under the US Constitution, the word distinct makes the difference, whereas in India, the word overlapping makes the difference. What do I mean by this? Because institutions for lawmaking, executive action, and judicial powers are distinct and not overlapping when it comes to the US Constitution. If you go to United Kingdom as good number of the audience must be aware, not written constitution, but no court of law in the UK can strike down a law on ground that it violates the UK constitution. So there is nothing called the distinct or the overlapping. India follows another. We have the third model of separation of power, wherein we say we are separate, be it legislative, executive or judicial body, but we allow some overlap. As we see delegated legislation, executive may exercise legislative powers, or even we have seen they can promulgate ordinances. So let us just, I would just focus on the today's topic in the context of the parliamentary privileges. It is very clearly written when you refer to Article 105 of the Constitution and Article 194 of the Constitution of India. Article 104 grants series of parliamentary privileges, whereas 194 grants to the legislators. So what does it guarantee? Means I'm just suggesting it as I feel that the parliamentarians can not be held liable for anything they say or any vote that they may make in a court of law. As you talked about P.V. Narasimha Rao, and then at the same time Vineet Narayan judgment becomes important here. Then other examples of parliamentary privileges include freedom to publish parliamentary proceedings without incurring any liability and freedom from arrest in civil cases. So still we see parliamentarians, they are not under the control of judiciary. So we say they are maintaining that independence. When you refer to Article 122 of the Indian Constitution, then parliamentary proceedings may not be called into question in any court of law for irregularity of procedure under the guard that separation of power is maintained. This is good. But at the same time, when we focus on the judicial statements in the form of judicial pronouncements, like if we go to the judgment, Rajaram Pal versus Speaker Lok Sabha 2007, then we come across the point that the courts have asserted that they have the power to exercise judicial review over parliamentary privileges and proceedings. And so is the case with state legislative assembly privileges and proceedings. And if we go to the next case, that is Quixoto versus Zajilu, 1992 as well, rather they went one step ahead. Speaker's decision to disqualify an MP for defection is subject to judicial review, as the speaker is discharging an adjudicatory function. And we cannot forget the first half of 1960s and later, and the incidents comes from the Uttar Pradesh Assembly. And in 1965, the powers, privileges, immunities of state legislature re, wherein the advisory opinion was given by the Supreme Court, wherein there was escalation of conflict between the Uttar Pradesh Legislative Assembly and the Allahabad High Court. It specifically said that judiciary has the power to interpret the nature, scope and effect of the privileges guaranteed to the legislature. But it also added that judiciary may examine whether exercise of privilege is consistent with fundamental rights of the citizen. So means what we come across, what cannot be done directly can be done indirectly. So I feel, and when it comes to two words, right and privileges, people have just, this is, I say that when I hear different statements, people mix both words. They are not mere words. They are rather two different identities which make the existence of individual vis-a-vis the institution. Because right is in the context of an individual. It is an affirmative claim against another. Because I have entered into that contract with the state, wherein the state has guaranteed me that protection. And right, when it comes to fundamental right, it's available against the state. Because state who has that power may override, may encroach upon my right. Who will save me against the state then? Then comes the right. So it's an affirmative claim against the state. But when it comes to privilege, privilege is not claim. Privilege is rather affirmative control. It is affirmative control over given relations. This is most important part. So when it comes to given relations, we mean a parliamentarian, when he is serving the public, when he is fighting for the public cause, he requires that nobody shall be permitted to hold him so that he does not furnish his responsibility. So that's why on the floor of the house, what he says is protected, but the same statement, if he refits outside the parliament, maybe in a public gathering, he cannot claim the privilege. So therein as well, we have to understand, and that's what you were rightfully bringing out with the help of certain judgments, that yes, the courts always have been correct, but yes, I with due respect to the parliament, with due respect to the executive branch, with respect to the judiciary, but this is also my responsibility, because I also form part of that we the people of India, and who solemnly resolved to give this constitution to ourselves. So I am part of the state. So when I am part of the state, do I claim the same thing from me? But before that comes the duty part. And that's what you rightfully said as well. So when we are talking about privileges, we have to talk about responsibilities. So these overreaching powers, so in India, what was suitable, what forefathers felt, they were absolutely correct in the context of bringing us the separation of power. We thought as American concept, but when we applied it in India, we rather made it overlapping instead of distinct. And I think that has been suitable. But the verbal jugglery is making the difference nowadays. People feel parliament is intruding into the judiciary function. Judiciary is intruding. That is not the case. That is not the case. They all are supporting each other. Yes, incidences happen when one may have a say which may be seen by other as an overriding effect than an overreaching effect. So that is a concern of understanding possibly. But I think that all the three arms of the state have been functioning well. Of course, there are exceptional situations and we cannot forget. Now, without much ado, I will not make more points, but I think that I would request, as in your own words, you informed everyone through judgments. And I think people have to focus on the words as well, because words are not mere words. They stand for our existence. They make us not an entity, but give us the recognition as a human being as well. So let us understand right, privilege, then parliament and different arms and etc. And thank you very much, sir, for even infuriating this thought in me. So I was able to bring it out of me and just say this, because, you know, when we do not use the right word, when we are not very precise with the terms, and then comes the confusion. And I think more confusion, chaos is because of words and words, not by statements. And you made the right statements, sir, at the right time. And thank you very much for this today's session, sir. And we definitely would love to have you on campus when we open after this. So you can visit us and you can see. And we would like to hear more from you and get the intellectual treat, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
I would thank you, sir. I would now invite my co-moderator and friend Raj Kamal to give a vote of thanks for today. Raj, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for gracing the occasion, sir, finding time to give this webinar, sir. And like Professor Ravanle sir mentioned, when things become normal post the pandemic, we will welcome you to the campus when you're here in Delhi next, sir. And this was a very enlightening lecture. Thank you very much, sir. And before we part ways for today, I would like to thank the broadcasting partners for the knowledge series of Law and Justice, Lex Witness, THS The Law Firm, Sadgamya, and Symbiosis Law School, Noida. Special thanks to our professor and mentor, Dr. C.J. Ravanle, sir, for providing this platform. I say this again, but you know, all the time